Good evening, folks. I think we're going to get started here. It's about 10 past 7, so it's good to see you all out here tonight. Welcome to tonight's lecture called Climate Myopia, Backing into the Future. This lecture is part of a series that's sponsored by the BC Creek Protection Society that's on energy and environment issues. Before I introduce our speaker tonight, I just want to give you a brief introduction to the society and what we do. We are a grassroots organization that was formed in 2006 by a bunch of kayakers, basically, who were concerned about some changes that they were seeing on their local rivers and creeks. There was widespread development, and there continues to be of run-of-river projects across BC, and the society was formed with the purpose of protecting rivers as part of ecologically unique systems of societal significance and providing public education about the importance of these water courses. And raising awareness of the issues that are facing them, including run-of-river projects. We also conduct and support research on the impacts of run-of-river projects on society and ecosystems. Although paddlers were some of the first people to notice these developments on rivers, our concerns have resonated with a lot of other groups. You will have seen Watershed Watch Salmon Society outside and Raincoast Conservation Foundation. Also with other people across the province, locals who are affected by these developments. And our concerns go far beyond the loss of kayak runs, but these developments affect entire ecosystems and the people who depend on natural resources. So I encourage you to learn more about the society and some of the things we're fighting against, the pamphlets outside, and we'll be around after the lecture again to talk about this tomorrow. So at the root of the mass development of run-of-river projects is the idea that developing green energy will somehow decelerate climate change. And tonight, Dr. McGonigal is going to speak about some of the flaws in this logic. Michael McGonigal is the Eco-Research Professor in Environmental Law and Policy at the Faculty of Law at University of Victoria. A lawyer and political ecologist, his work in Greenpeace in the 1970s led to the international moratorium on commercial whaling. During this time, he co-founded Greenpeace International. In the 1980s, he worked on wilderness conservation and forestry reform in British Columbia, including leading the successful struggle to protect the Stein River Valley from industrial logging. The Stein River is 430 square miles in size and flows into the Fraser 100 miles northeast of Vancouver. He was one of the lead organizers of Save the Stein movement that led to the protection of the Stein River Valley as a provincial park. As chair and board of Greenpeace Canada, he initiated its forest campaign in 1990. As co-founder in the late 1990s of Smart Growth BC and Forest Futures, he recently founded the POLIS Project on Ecological Governance at UVic. And he's written extensively in the areas of resource and environmental law and policy, and has been developing a new field of green legal theory. And drawing on his recent work on university reform for sustainability, he has co-authored Planet U, Sustaining the World, Reinventing the University, and Minding Place towards a rational political ecology of the sustainable university. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Michael McGonigal.
Well, thank you very, very much. It's a great thrill to be here, and a great pleasure to have such a good turnout. I'm overwhelmed, and I hope I will repay your confidence in me with an interesting and useful talk. I also want to really congratulate the Stream Protection Society is doing an invaluable service to British Columbia in all the work you're doing, drawing attention to the problems with run-of-river and elevating people's commitment to protecting, which is one of the great heritages of BC, of course, its wild river systems. And I think this event, or this series of talks, is very important as well, because we really are, and I think everyone in the audience would agree with me that I hope that we're really at a pivotal point in our history, and we have to take our future into our hands in ways that we really haven't done to date, and without our actions, we're going to see a lot more than our rivers going down. So I want to talk today about, first of all, in sort of three parts. I want to talk about the run-of-the-river conflict, just kind of introduce how we came together and how I got here. But then I want to set it in a broader context, and I'm going to be a bit academic, if you don't mind, for a bit, trying to put the whole issue of rivers and green energy and climate change in a larger kind of historical context, which I think, for me, is really why I got involved in the run-of-river debate a few months ago, but also because I think it's critical for our environmentalists in British Columbia and for our citizens in British Columbia and around the world. So after that context, I want to return and say, okay, in light of this, what are the challenges ahead of us, and how do we address these? So, climate myopia, run of the river. I got involved in the controversy, and I'll talk about it in a second, when David Beers, who's the editor of the Tyee magazine, and if any of you don't read the Tyee, you should, an online newspaper that's fabulous, the news you don't get in the mainstream media. He contacted me and said, you know, Michael, you've been involved in issues like the Stein and River, you teach in the university, can you put your analysis as to what this controversy is about? And then of course, he highlighted veteran environmentalist. I thought, well, I'm even older than I thought I was. But so my talk was real. My piece in the Tyee was about the split that has happened in the environmental movement over the last year and over the last really couple of years as Run of River takes off, but really over the last year. And that split was between those who think green energy is absolutely what we need to produce, no matter what the cost almost, in order to decouple us from very carbon-intensive hydrocarbon energies and to shift away from carbon-intensive energies to different forms of alternative renewable energies. And so that battle, the battle arose over run of river. A green energy strategy that has this lovely name, run of river, because ideally what it does just takes a little bit of water out of a pipe high up in a river and then puts it back in the river later on and runs it through a turbine. You don't have to have big dams and big impoundments and very minimal environmental impact, supposedly. Versus more traditional environmentalists, if you want, who want to see rivers protected and not developed in ways that cause what they would argue is a lot of damage, despite the claims that run a river is not such a problem because it doesn't have large dams. This all took place, and I'm sure I'm telling you stuff you already know, but this all took place within the context of the last election, where those supporting run of river and those supporting strategies to combat climate change would essentially support the Liberal government in power because of their espousal both of run of river but also supporting carbon taxes, a small carbon tax that is imposed on gasoline and other fuels in British Columbia. So it's a green, quote, a green government. All the while ignoring, of course, issues that have great concern to environmentalists, such as the proliferation of fish farms, prospect of tanker traffic down the coast through exporting Albertan oil through pipelines to Asia, Gateway project to build more highways, and goes on and on and on. So this split between green energy and a new way of producing energy on the one hand, and those who said, well, it's actually not that green, and I'll talk about that in a second, but also, what about all these other issues? And yes, carbon tax is there, which is good, but it's actually not a significant carbon tax. Now, my attachment to this, as has been explained, goes way back. I mean, I grew up beside a small creek as a kid, and like many other environmentalists, saw that creek get progressively destroyed over my youth. I used to fish in it and get trout and bring it home as a kid, and then the housing subdivisions would go in and septic systems, and eventually it became culverted and was gone. And then spent many years at the Stein, which is a fabulous, many of you may have hiked it, a fabulous river, wild river that is filled with, of course, great wildlife and a lot of heritage values. And right at the mouth of it is Lytton, the village of Lytton, where the local Indian band has been using the place for centuries. It's a beautiful, fabulous place. So my attachment is strong to rivers. And when you look at the run of the river proposals. So far, there have been 118, as of the beginning of this year, 118 licenses granted and 577 applications pending on other rivers throughout the province. So potentially transforming these rivers in very dramatic ways throughout the entire province, affecting BC's heritage in all kinds of ways, including impacts on salmon and so on. But recently, in the spring, this last spring, I was up with my wife Wendy and other people up in the Stein for a visit back. Hadn't been there for quite a while, and as we got there to cross the Fraser, there was a native couple from the village in their car waiting to cross, and there's a huge lineup of cars getting across this ferry across the Fraser River. It has become a popular tourist spot, which is what we hoped. And we started chatting. He was telling me about the state of the salmon in the Fraser. And we were living up there 20 years ago. There were nets all up and down the Fraser, and lots of sockeye and spring salmon being caught and being used by the local community. So there's virtually nothing. Sometimes you put his net out for a week, you get a couple of fish, and some of them will have lesions on them. And he said the condition of the fish are terrible in the Fraser. And as we know, this last summer, very few sockeye returned. That's not climate change. I mean, maybe climate change has an impact, but it's not just climate change. There's pollution issues, there's fish farms, there's a whole range of problems. Diversion of waters flowing into the Fraser. That issue exists regardless of climate change, but will be made significantly worse with climate change. As we then went into the Stein, I started thinking about the controversy over run of the river and our battle to preserve it from industrial logging. And the things that kept logging out were, one, they would have to put a bridge across the Fraser to get there. If you're going to do run of the river and develop that river, you'd have to put a bridge across the Fraser River. Then as you hiked up the canyon, this narrow canyon, lovely canyon, drops 8 miles, and a lot of current, hard to kayak, very, very rough water. Good elevation drop, maybe that would be a good place for a nice pipeline down there. Well, if you're going to put a pipeline, you're going to have to put a road. One of the ways we kept the forest industry out of the Stein was the impact that road building would have on that river, which would blast into the river, cause blockages, impede fish migration, and so on. And then you go up to, when you get up to where you would probably be taking water into this pipe, you're right where the forests begin, the loggable forests. So all the things that has kept the Stein the way it is, and now it's a provincial park, so hopefully it's even more secure, but who knows. All the things that kept the forest industry out and have kept that watershed wild would be gone, and the damages would be done on the lower river. So in that particular case, it would be wrong to say that run of river would have no environmental impact. Not only would it have very dramatic environmental impact, it would have impact in terms of opening the valley up to all kinds of other uses. But the bigger concern that I have with run of the river, I mean, not bigger concern, the context within which all this happens is what might be called, to use an academic phrase, the kind of political economy of this. And Adam Smith once, a couple hundred years ago, defined political economy as the nature and causes of the wealth of nations. What are we talking about in terms of the wealth we're creating in this society when we want to get green electricity from an area, a river like the Stein or the other 500 streams that have pending applications? And that's really the big problem. One of the major concerns is that this is new energy. It's a supply solution, right? The goal is to bring more energy electricity into the grid. And what do you do when you do that? Well, okay, maybe it's carbon friendly in the sense that it's not hydrocarbons, but it's not displacing hydrocarbons. It's just adding more energy. And what that is doing is it's helping to grow the energy machine. It's not run a river and a lot of green energies, whether it's windmills, rivers, hydroelectric dams, run-of-river projects, are not predicated upon displacing other forms of energy. If they were, they might be, so every watt you bring in with an alternative form of energy, you have to take 1 or 2 watts of oil, a thermal plant energy from a thermal plant out. That would be more acceptable, but those policies or rules are not in place. It's more energy. Now maybe it shifts from carbon, but does it shift from carbon in ways that are not undone in other parts of the economy? So if we're investing more money in bridges and traffic and highways, which demand fuel, and we're justifying new energy projects because we're trying to displace that fuel, there's a kind of set of incoherent policies going on. And above all, and this is really the crux, even if we're reducing the amount of carbon by, say, taking a thermal plant offline and putting a hydroelectric project online, but the economy is always growing, always growing, always growing. Eventually, the gains that we're getting are going to be offset because it's going to demand more and more. An economy twice the size of our existing economy will be very hard-pressed to survive, especially as it keeps doubling over time, and survive with the amount of energy we've got available. We'll demand more energy. So let me turn a bit I'll finish this off and then turn to some of the kind of historical perspectives on this. This is actually the way the world economy has worked. In the last century, the global economy has increased 14-fold in size. In the time that has happened, our energy use has gone up 16-fold. And with the increase in energy over the last century, 16-fold, carbon dioxide output has gone up 17-fold. So the linkage is really between energy use and the economy. The economy demands energy. Energy creates costs, whether it's carbon in the atmosphere or damming rivers and so on. The problem then becomes one not just of carbon, not just of energy, but the impacts of a growing economy itself. And I want to show you, you can't see it too well from back there, but maybe you can. A book by Gus Speth, who is a very senior administrator, in the American government, is now dean of the School of Forestry and Environmental Management at Yale, but a real insider in the American government for years, negotiated all kinds of treaties, and one of the sort of most respected Washington environmentalists. The book is called The Bridge at the Edge of the World. The subtitle, interestingly, is Capitalism, the Environment, and Crossing from Crisis to Sustainability. Capitalism. He talks about capitalism. I'm going to talk about capitalism a lot, which is a topic that's on everyone's mind these days. But what he opens the book with is, I don't know if you can see this, but it's a series of graphs. You see all these graphs. They all have the same shape. They begin low on the left, and then they move across, and then they shoot up. Carbon dioxide emissions is one of those. That's the carbon dioxide one, shooting up. But also ozone depletion, number of great floods, average surface temperatures, scale of fishing, change in coastal zone biochemistry, loss of biodiversity, increase in motor vehicles, paper consumption, water use, fertilizer consumption, damming of rivers. The pattern is not just carbon. It's all over the place. So to focus on carbon, one issue, when you've got these trajectories everywhere, what are we going to do with the rest of it? Well, one of the things we'll do, in this case, maybe we'll reduce a bit of carbon, but we'll dam a river and affect fisheries, something to that effect. So it's a bigger problem. The bigger problem is also captured in a phrase, human appropriation of net primary productivity. Net primary productivity. Say 200 years ago, the human population on this planet took approximately 5% of the ecological productivity that the other 95% went to sustain forests or chimpanzees or fish. Now it's 26 to 30%. So our consumption of the productivity of the planet has gone from 5% to 30%. We're squeezing other things out, other things we depend upon. It's forecast under existing economic growth rates by 2050 to be 50%. So we'll go from 5 to 50%. Same as, that's where you get those graphs. Recently, a few weeks ago, Nature, one of the world's leading scientific journals, published an article called A Safe Operating Space for Humanity, in which it listed 10 critical issues facing humanity. Climate change was certainly one of them, and there's no question about its pervasive, hugely pervasive costs. But it also talked about the scale of biodiversity loss and the impact that progressive loss of biodiversity will have on basically collapsing ecosystems. It talked about the nitrogen cycle. We're 4 times, according to them, we have to reduce our use of nitrogen and pollution, emission of nitrogen into the atmosphere and into groundwater and into water by 75%, our agricultural systems. So we have got a pattern, a historical pattern of overconsumption and growth, which is not just about carbon. Carbon is clearly a huge threat, but it is not really where we have to go to answer that threat. Instead, we have to talk about really tough stuff. We have to talk about capitalism. We have to talk about the nature of the economic system that we all live with, that is part of who we are, that we breathe in ourselves, that is just the background to our lives. We have to kind of ask questions about that. We have to look at our governments and the nature of the state system that we've created, and what our democracy has achieved and is capable of achieving. And to do that, and this is why I think this series is an important one, is we need to develop our own knowledge. We need to actually be able critically to engage in understanding how these systems work and what's possible with them and what are the obstacles. But to do that, we don't just have to understand it, we have to be able to talk about it. And that's going to be my numero uno message tonight, is the need to have what I call a conversation, a social conversation that is not presently taking place. One of the reasons it's not taking place, as soon as you mention capitalism in a critical way, you are outside the tents. And that was part of the run-of-river issue, right? That some of the environmentalists who are inside the tent, they want to influence policy by being credible to decision makers. As soon as you start being too critical, you're outside. We have what I call a line. There's a line. Above the line, you can, as long as you talk in language that's not threatening, it's okay. Below the line, you're gone. We have to get rid of that line. So, I want to talk now, my second part of this is about the nature of that line. And a couple of weeks ago, there was a head popped up through the line in the form of Elinor Ostrom, who won the Nobel Economics Prize for her work on the commons. And I say it popped up above the line because her work has been going on for 20 years. People have been talking about the commons for a lot longer than that. But she now got recognized by the Nobel Prize givers, and it was a political decision, because they're saying we have to think about economics differently. And what Ostrom has studied is the commons, which is to say basically communities that self-regulate, look after resources themselves. Our Aboriginal communities are a good example of commons management. Their own rules and customs that are embedded in who they are in their place, and they regulate it. They don't regulate it through government or through a market. And her argument was, that's very important, and we should pay attention to that. And the recognition of her for that by the Academy was surprising, because it's really, I mean, there are those who could cast her analysis in a way sympathetic to the market, but it really was a recognition of non-market forms of resource use and management and life exchanges, economic exchanges. The most famous story of the commons, and many of you will have heard this, anyone who's gone through any social science class in university will have heard Garrett Hardin's famous article in Science, the journal Science in 1967, I think, The Tragedy of the Commons. And his argument in that was that groups that do the sort of management I was talking about, commons management, don't work. And the reason they don't work is because it actually pays for an individual to ignore the needs of the group and get as much as they can individually. And so everyone will be tempted to overgraze the commons rather than collectively protect it. And the only solution, Hardin argued, was privatize it. Break it up into private property. And the long literature has followed that. Mainstream economics embraced Hardin as why we have to privatize resources in order to make them to have them well managed. But a dissident, a below the line, if you want, literature flowed and said, yeah, that's what's happened all right. That's how we've grown. Development as enclosure. We have developed as an economic society by enclosing the commons, by privatizing it, by pushing Aboriginal people off, by taking other forms of community and management and marginalizing them, and saying, no, let's privatize it. And with the assistance of government, of the state, colonialism. So not just the market, but the state as well. Ostrom, the recognition of Ostrom and the Nobel Prize is pretty big, is we got to start thinking about this. We got to start talking about this. Now, next year, the Nobel Prize should go to Herman Daly. Now, that would really be quite a shock. Herman Daly and his mentor, Georgescu Roygan, who wrote a book in the early 1970s called Economics and the Entropy Process. And what Daly is famous for, much more radical critique than Ostrom, is that what he calls the steady state economy, which is to say an economy, whenever we do something, whenever we build something, the very fact of building it has costs, has high costs. And the example that's widely used, if you take a high cost that you can't get back. If you want to have a fire in your fireplace, and you take a log and you put that log in the fireplace, that log has got embedded energy in it. There you can hold it, and you can get stuff from that. You can get heat from it. So you put it in your fireplace, you get heat. At the end, you got heat. It's not that it's disappeared, it's dissipated. And you've got ashes. You can't put that back together. Anytime you build a car or anything, this room, you've got to use that type of energy which is embedded and embodied and consume it and turn it into non-usable energy. Moving from high entropy to low entropy, where you do not have that embedded energy and it's gone. So the implications of that, if the Nobel Prize were to go to Daly, would be, well, an economy that's based on throwing lots of wood in the fireplace or lots of energy into building cars is actually creating a lot of disorder by the very fact of creating all these things. And Daly's argument is that we need to move from an economy based on flow, lots of economic activity, stimulus, to one based on stock, having structures that are stable, long-term, and require as minimum throughput as possible. And he, of course, situates his argument in laws of thermodynamics and said, this is the way the world is. This is a law of nature. And a flow economy, an economy constantly seeking more growth, is actually going up against the laws of nature. And that particularly, the thermodynamic laws of nature. Well, that's pretty radical, and that would bring some change to people's discussions of the nature of our economy. Maybe there will be a Nobel Prize. People have talked for years that Daly and Georgescu Roygan, is now dead, but posthumously deserve a Nobel Prize, because that's such a radical insight, a critical insight that's gives us lots of opportunity for new directions, new ways to look. We can go back even further, below the line. Remember, these are all economists who are not mainstream economists. Go back another step. Very famous writer Karl Polanyi, who in the 1940s wrote a great book, The Great Transformation. I think Polanyi's grandson is John Polanyi, the chemist at University of Toronto who got the Nobel Prize in chemistry. I'm pretty sure it's his grandson. But his argument, like Ostrom, was that societies, the commons, was really how the whole world has worked in all societies except very highly organized societies. But above all, to take the market and to make the market the center of all of our actions is to undermine these communal structures in ways that cannot be sustained. And he had a very famous line about Adam Smith, who wrote in his famous work in the 1770s that the natural tendency of humankind is to truck, barter, and trade. And he said, Polanyi says, nonsense. That's not true at all. Yeah, people have markets, but they're always small. They're always at the side of the economy. It's much more redistribution and gift-giving and reciprocity and looking after your household. It's not a market-based economy. There's not market-based economies. And his great line was, never has a misreading of history, such a great misreading of history, been so prophetic of the future. And so he would be another person in this below the line. He said there's different forms of economy. We have to look more deeply. And you can go back even further, of course, to the most below the line of them all, Marx. And even to mention Marx, given the nature of the society we have, is to risk marginalization, particularly in North America. In Europe, very commonly discussed. In the academy, very commonly discussed. But to mention Marx is again below the line. That line separates one from the mainstream. But his analysis too about why capitalism needs economic growth, why capitalism is driven to commodify rivers and make them something whose value is associated with money, not with their physical attributes. How this process leads to the accumulation of money, and how we need to keep expanding that and always get more. And Marx's most famous conclusion was that there is a contradiction in the way our capital system works, which is the more we get, the more costs we impose, particularly, he argued, on labor. And that labor would be exploited and eventually would rise up and overthrow capital, which did not happen, certainly in the way that he forecast. So the focus of these historians below the line, as I say, is really on how we create wealth in different ways, not just ways that we're used to. Ways that recognize limits, like steady-state economics. Ways that recognize the importance of community, the importance of other forms of sharing than just the market. And also the consequences will be put too much of our faith in the market, and in particular in large-scale capital. Now, on the other hand, above the line, there's none of that. There's none of that. Growth is everything. We just need to grow, and we don't have to. Growth without end. We can solve all our problems. Equity, no need to redistribute wealth, the way Polanyi would argue a community would do. We'll just grow some more, and the trickle-down effect will make the poor people richer. So we just have to keep getting richer. There's no concern about physical limits. It's just prices. If something's too scarce, the price will go up and we'll switch to something else. So forget steady-state economics. We don't have to worry about environmental and social affairs because the market will look after it. What I'm suggesting, and I'll come back to this in a minute, is we need to open up that discussion. We need to break the line. Capital is causing problems. The growth economy is causing serious problems. And we need to begin to discuss new ways of using markets and new ways of looking at growth. Again, going back to run-of-river, just saying we need new forms of energy that don't have carbon is so far away from the type of discussion that we need as a collective community if we're going to deal with these range of environmental problems. It's so far away, it's not even in the same ballpark, and that's the discussion we need to have. So going back, we're not having that, but it's opening up. It's opening up because of climate change. It's opening up because of people like Gus Beth, a Washington insider, is now willing to talk about it. It's opening up because climate change itself is threatening the economy. And more recently, it's opened up because we've seen the excesses of basically mindless capitalism in the last 12 months with the collapse of the housing market and the bubble and everyone, the financial crises. But what was the response to that? What has been the response to that? Well, the big response, of course, came in April of this past year in London, when all the G20 got together and announced they've come up with an agreement, and they're all going to do, and this is a quote, "We will do whatever we have to do to re-stimulate the economy, to get the flow moving again." Herman Daly, of course, is standing there going, That's the problem, right? That's the physical problem. But to get the economy going, to stimulate. We are consumers. The economy is not to satisfy us as consumers now. We have to consume in order to get the economy growing, right? And so there's a bit of an ends-means inversion there. It's understandable, however, because over the last many centuries, but particularly since the Second World War, we have become totally dependent upon this growth machine. This is where our wealth comes from. And we see that when the economy slides, unemployment, taxes go down, governments lay off people, social programs go, we're dependent on it. It's not an easy out from this dependence, even with this physical conflict, which is why it's so difficult to resolve. A week after the London Consensus, it was called, which is the consensus of world leaders to stimulate the economy in a coordinated way, to bring the government back in after 20 years of globalization where governments were supposed to step back and just let the market do its thing with the consequences we saw. So this London Consensus, a week later there's another event in London, very little one, and it was put out. It was a report, release of a report by the UK's Commission on Sustainable Development, and it's called Prosperity, the Prosperity Report, Prosperity Without Growth. And it's one of the best pieces I have seen on how the growth problem, how our growth addiction will cause significant problems in the future and must be addressed if we're going to deal with climate change and other environmental challenges. Below the line, you don't see discussion of this, right? But let me just quote a couple of statements from this. These impacts are already unsustainable. In the last quarter of a century, the global economy has doubled while an estimated 60% of the world's ecosystems have been degraded. Global carbon emissions have risen by 40% since 1990. Significant scarcity in key resources such as oil may be less than a decade away. A world in which things simply go on as usual is inconceivable. But what about a world in which 9 billion people all aspire to the level of affluence achieved in the OECD nations? Such an economy would need to be 15 times the size of this one by 2050, and 40 times bigger than by the end of the century. And 40 times bigger by the end of the century. For this reason, responses to the crisis which aim to restore the status quo are deeply misguided and doomed to failure. On the other hand, questioning growth is deemed to be the act of lunatics, idealists, and revolutionaries. They pose the problem very well. If you're going to have a globe of equity and justice, it's going to have a huge economy. China and India right now are saying, we're not going to buy into Copenhagen with you rich guys getting off for all the damage you've done and expect us to bear that. Perfectly understandable position. On the other hand, us rich guys, our government say, well, we're not going to bear the responsibility ourselves because our economies will go down. There's an impasse. There's an impasse over growth, equity, and the future of the global economy. So the line is bulging. How do we break it? How do we get it going? That leads me now to kind of my third major part of this discussion is government, the state, democracy. I've been talking about the economy, but the economy that we have didn't evolve on its own. As far back as you wish to go in the rise of the capital economy from the Middle Ages on, government has been there. The state has been there. It's always been there. And so, for example, when in the 19th century Marx was preaching his revolutionary rhetoric, Communist Manifesto, labor was very severely being abused by capital exploitation. So you've got Dickens and the terrible situations in the industrial factories, a lot of revolutionary unrest. The state came to his rescue. And you began to see in the late part of the 19th century and the early part of the 20th century social welfare reforms, protection for against child labor, workers' compensation, and a steady series of the state becoming more and more involved in making the economy work. But one thing didn't change until the Second World War. And that isn't really until the Second World War, the governments never had an overall responsibility for the economy. It would look at specific things like child labor or unemployment, but it wasn't the goal of the government to keep the economy afloat. And as a result, during the Depression, when the crash occurred, governments looked around and said, what do we do? Well, it's not really, we'll protect ourselves, we'll withdraw, we'll save our money, and whatever we've got, and it wasn't our job to get it going again. Keynes came along, John Maynard Keynes, and argued, no, when the economy's down, government should get in there and pump it up. Stimulate it. And it's a famous example that if you just pay people to dig holes, and bury a pot of gold and pay them to fill it up again, and then let private enterprise go and dig it up again, that's what government needs to do. Get the flow going, get people active, get the economy working. And that's exactly what happened with the Second World War. As people recognize, the overcoming of the last depression was really as a result of the Second World War. And since then, since the Second World War, that's been our mantra. Jane Jacobs, the great urban theorist who lived in Toronto and died a couple of years ago, wrote how we're still haunted by the Depression. Not just, as you've seen in the last year, not just because of economic downturn, the economics, but particularly fear of joblessness. The specter of thousands of people lining up in dusty fields looking for work and migrating across the country, that drives our psyche in fundamental ways. And that's true. I think that's very true. That we're driven by the past. We're backing into the future out of fear of the past. So the goal of government is to keep that economy going. And we put in place an architecture with all the trading arrangements and so on after the Second World War that has made sure that has happened. And now as we face this depression, this seeming depression, or potential depression, the stimulus package has been the answer to it. So what I'm saying here is that government, our government, the only thing we have to turn to is actually as embedded in the problem we're trying to solve as anybody else. Governments are ones that give out tenures to the forest industry in order to keep employment going, who turn over lands to mineral prospectors and mines to fuel that economy, or subsidize large agricultural industries to get bigger, and provide new energy subsidies for run-of-river or for windmills or whatever. Our government is deeply dependent, entrenched in this large-scale economic process and deeply dependent upon it. Just recently, it was, I think, noted that part of the reason arts funding has been cut in BC and lots of social welfare programs have been cut is because the gas revenues in BC have gone down $1 billion. Our government depends upon people using gas. And interestingly enough, with the harmonized sales tax, one of the exemptions that this government, which has put in a carbon tax in order to encourage people not to use energy, exemptions is for gasoline, airplane fuel, is exempted from this new HST. So with governments both part of the dependency and also trying to solve these problems, we have incoherence. We have an incoherent response to this global crisis that we confront. In my field, in the law school, environmental law is a perfect example of that. Environmental law is totally dependent upon government regulating to protect the environment. So we get problems where the frustration of environmentalists who want to see fish farms removed because maybe they're going to undermine the entire millions of years of evolution with their salmon species. No, the governments depend on supporting those resources, those economies. Or the incoherence of putting in the Gateway project that will need more traffic and more fuel being done and more exports going off to China at the same time as they're supposedly trying to reduce our carbon footprint. And so I want to just quote from Gus Speth, again, who's, as I say, an insider, his comment about the effect on democracy. What does this mean? All we have is democracy. That's it. We have to make change through our voice as citizens. Quote, Washington today is more a problem than a solution. It is hooked on GDP growth, for its revenues, for its constituencies, and for its influence abroad. It is being captured by the very corporations and concentration of wealth it should be seeking to regulate and revamp. A pattern that has now reached alarming proportions. This is an insider. And it is hobbled by an array of dysfunctional institutional arrangements. Peter Barnes explains the problem starkly. Quote, the reason capitalism distorts democracy is simple. Democracy is an open system, and economic power can easily infect it. By contrast, capitalism is a gated system. Its bastions aren't easily accessed by the masses. So, I would argue that what we need to do in run-of-the-river is, with run-of-the-river or any of our environmental problems, is recognize we are trapped. We have nowhere to turn. We have an economy in which we're all embedded, which works to create great levels of wealth for some, but by impoverishing the planet and overusing it on these hugely shooting up patterns in our graphs of resource and consumption. We have a momentum that resists change. We have nowhere to turn. Interestingly, though, the chaos that is coming is one that is widely shared and seen across the spectrum. People like Jeff Rubin, the former economist, The Economist, who worked in the financial sector in Toronto, has written the book, Your World is about to get a whole lot smaller, in which he says the energy crisis is going to lead to booms and busts. Prices going shooting up, causing recessions, crashes, up and down. And the only out for that is a much retracted global economy. Trade will become too expensive because we won't have the energy to fuel it. James Kunstler wrote The Long Emergency, the book The Long Emergency. Same sort of argument, that it's an emergency that we face, but it's a long one because we're not dealing with it. As oil runs down, as resources get scarce, we're going to find ourselves with fewer and fewer options. Tad Homer Dixon from Victoria, his book The Upside of Down, who argues, and I think this is a great insight, that really what we are going to do and what we need is a crash. He says, is it going to be a catastrophe, or is it going to be, what's the word he uses, a problem that's solvable? And his question is, how big an upset do we need to be able to make basic changes? And so that, I think, is the context within which we need to deal with environmental problems. Not that there's single solvable ones by simply tackling carbon. And it's not that easy to tackle because it's not about carbon. It's about energy use. It's about our economy. And we need to do it not by looking back, but by looking ahead. And I want to just conclude with a couple of ways to look ahead. Just recently, the German government released a report in which they said the numbers are all off. Forget it. It's way faster, way more problematic than any of the current studies. We're way beyond the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. And they concluded that the American government, the United States, has to become carbon neutral. That is to say, putting no carbon in the atmosphere at all, zero, down to carbon neutral by 2020. And I haven't, maybe I've got the quote here, he said, I'm stunned by my own numbers. And what he called for was a green Apollo project, right? We got a decade to get to the moon. An Apollo project raises all kinds of issues that are kind of not really what he wants, but a commitment, a huge commitment to a green world. And I think that's correct. I think what we need is to be able to see, back during the election, one of the phrases that was thrown out was, "It's a wartime emergency. It's a wartime emergency." At the conclusion of that argument was, and we got to put in all kinds of run-of-river projects because it's a wartime emergency in order to get carbon out, right? And therefore, anybody who's opposed to this is not legitimate. Was the kind of underpinning. Well, if it is a wartime emergency, then we have to do a very different type of response. First of all, we need to open up our consideration of what types of economies economies can work. What types of communal-based economies, what types of low growth and non-growth economies, and how could we create those? Local new economic forms. The people like Jeff Rubin, an investment guru, says is necessary, and people like Kunstler, a social critic, also say is necessary. And I think we have to recognize, and this is kind of the flip side to me of the climate change challenge and all these coming together of these crises, is it may be our last chance to build what we need to build in order to have a quality of life on this planet for hundreds of years to come. It is going to become more and more and more difficult to muster the economic and the physical resources to build infrastructure that we need. We don't have a sustainable infrastructure. We need to be able to do different forms of transportation, whether it's bicycle routes or train systems, or ones that are much less dependent than energy than private automobiles. We need to look at new forms of agriculture. We need to rebuild our cities. We need to deal with quality of life. We need to make our places, where we live, places we want to be, not escape from, not suburbs and inner cities that we want to get away from because they're not good places to be. We need to work on our healthcare system, not to patch the problems, but to actually create a healthy society. We need to do that fast. And the model, I would say, that we need is a model that really takes not just environmental issues seriously, but social issues. We cannot have a sustainable society without a just society. No question about it. India and China have every right to demand their share of the pie because we've been taking from them for many, many years. So unless we recognize those interests, and unless we can meet the interests of homeless people and people of all forms of lower income or other ways of being shut out of the mainstream, unless we can deal with that, we're going to have a repressive society because we can't buy them off with economic growth. So we need a new model of development. Not a model of economic growth, not a model of progress where we expand, but a model of, I call, ingress, where we build internally, where we create a society internally that we can survive with and that can make us better people. And instead, what do we have? $65 million on a new bridge. Do we need a new bridge? $23 million in a highway exchange to get cars from McTavish Road up into the airports. Billions of dollars on a gateway project and new bridges. $350 million on a retractable roof for BC Place. UVic proposing a parking lot, 7-story parking lots. It's incoherent. These policies don't make sense. We don't have time to continue to invest in the past. We have to start to invest in the future. And one thing that does work, that has been shown to work, is slowing down. The greatest change in emissions and the least impact, the most productive impact in slowing down our carbon emissions has been this last year in the recession. And the energy technicians, people like Vaclav Smil at the University of Manitoba, who show that big energy transitions, new forms of energy, take decades to put in place, not years. We can change our energy system much more easily by conserving and building non-energy intensive systems than by creating new sources of supply. We have to reduce our economic flow permanently. We have to do that, and we can't waste time doing that. We need to break the line. We need to look at new forms of economy and what sort of a world do we want? What sort of an ethical world do we want? How are we going to get that? We need to do this with a conversation. We don't need to rush off and do action, believe it or not. The irony of this is all the sort of stampede to build windmills and build run-of-river projects or put mirrors in the sky. No. We need to stop. We need to actually say, let's figure out where we're at. This sounds it's an ironic conclusion in a way, because we do need to move quickly, but we need to move quickly thinking and understanding collectively where we are. We need democracy. We need democracy. We need real democracy. Not a democracy where we turn to the government, which is conflicted. and ask it to solve the problem, but where we, the people, make that happen. And we make that happen by discussing things, by openly being willing to break the line and talk about things we haven't talked about, and to do so in ways that provide all kinds of exciting opportunities to rebuild our cities, to rebuild our planet in a way that's sustainable. And I think that's what's at stake when we look at the future of our rivers. We don't need to do that damage. We need to slow down, and we need to think again. We need to rebuild our consciousness, if you want, and move ahead on that basis. Thank you. Oh yeah, sure.
Dr. McGonigal said he'll take a few questions now if you want, and then I'm sure we'll be sticking around later outside to discuss some of these issues after the talk. So if there's any questions.
And comments, discussion, yeah.
Dr. McGonigal, the economy of British Columbia is obviously, as you said, it's deeply enmeshed in this capitalist economic system. It's also very much of a resource-based economy. We have very little of our own self-sustainable food production or material production. Do you have any sense of a model along the lines that you're proposing that could actually sustain a population of 4 million people in this location?
Well, I don't think it's an end product, an end result that needs to be mapped out right now. I think what needs to do is we need to start taking steps to change it. I mean, it's like the Titanic, right? You don't turn it all at once. So, for example, this money that we're misallocating for infrastructure that's propping up road systems and expanding our dependence on the car, let's stop doing that. Let's start, agriculture. Vancouver Island in the 50s produced 85% of its own food. And there's a huge population at UVic and all throughout Victoria who would love much more to be able to participate in food production. And we don't think about that. Instead, we just go to Thrifty's and get our food wherever it comes from. So I don't think it's and transportation as well, right? I mean, there are lots of other forms of transportation than dependent on the automobile. I mean, our bus systems, our public transit needs much greater, much bigger expansion so it can be more convenient to use. So I don't. I think the end vision is where we need to get to. I don't think it's that we say. Who was it? Herman Daly said, put out a new direction and people will raise all the problems. Ask them about the problems associated with nuclear power, and no, we can fix that, right? So I think what we need to be able to do is have not hope, but self-confidence that we can actually start and make the changes. It will evolve. So I don't know. I don't say that in 10 years we will be completely self-reliant for 4 million people in British Columbia, but we may have a very, very different trading regime where we don't, send cars from the States to Europe and European cars from Europe to Canada and just all these exchanges. We may have complementary trade where our trade is much more sensitive to what one country can provide for others. So different types of trading regimes, different types of local economy, different types of money systems, new forms of co-ops, not always the same sorts of businesses. So there's a huge array of possibilities. We just have to start. Yep.
I'm visiting from Ontario, and I think we missed a really big opportunity to go in the direction that you were talking about tonight. The auto parts industry and auto industry in general in Ontario has really been hit very hard in the last year or so. And the government's, in its knee-jerk reaction to get things going, has thrown all kinds of money to kind of prop that system up, where they really had an opportunity to go in a completely different direction. And unfortunately, I'm not sure what the politician sitting in the chair would say with constituents and everything else on his back about jobs and losses and things like that.
Well, you know, it's not, obviously, it's not easy. I mean, if it were easy, we'd have come up with solutions and made changes already. But when you've got a huge industry like that with so many people dependent upon it, and so much tax revenue being generated by the sales of cars and so on, that's why we keep going in that direction. I mean, it's very difficult to tackle those issues. But I think you know, where you could say, well, maybe we could transform the auto industry into production of, you know, streetcars or new forms of public transit. I mean, during the Second World War, I'm talking about a wartime emergency, the automobile industry stopped producing cars. And the whole thing was retooled into producing military equipment, right? So that it was possible then. Maybe we could retool it or begin retooling it in new ways. But above all, we don't even talk about that, right? We talk about electric cars. We talk about you know, the clunker program to get old cars off the road so people buy new ones. It's really trying to crank up the old car economy with some bells and whistles. We need to, again, it's the conversation we need to have. How do we deal with those problems?